I'm going to talk about care in terms of sort of social policy. So I'm going to focus on the care system before COVID-19, spend a little bit of time on what's happened during COVID-19, and then what I think the future of the care system could be or should be. So before COVID-19, I think it's safe to say that, you know, it's been mentioned before, the social care system is a broken system. We had the Dill-Knot review in 2019, and really we've been waiting for a care bill to take some of that thinking forward since 2011. In the meantime, system has been under funding stress, with sticking plasters of ad hoc money being thrown at it every year just to keep the system going and stop it from falling over. And research that's been done shown that even just to sort of keep the current system going, it's underfunded by 2.2 to 2.5 billion pounds. So significant issues there on the funding side. And then on the other side is the workforce issues. So for example, a Skills for Care report in 2019 identified that there's a vacancy rate of 8%, so a shortfall of 122,000 jobs. Turnover rates of 30% within the sector, which obviously impacts on the quality of service and the continuity of service that people get. 24% or a quarter of all the jobs are on 0 hours contracts. And the thing that stuck for me was that actually 30% of the workforce is aged 55 plus. So clearly there's a succession planning and issue around the workforce there that's needed. The other big issue is around 8% of the workforce being EU nationals and unlikely to meet the post-Brexit salary threshold of £25,600 for permission to work in the country. And the Skills for Care report in 2019 also suggested that to keep pace with the population growth of over 65s between now and 2035, that we'd need an additional 580,000 care jobs to come into the sector. So some big numbers there. Since the Dill-Knot review in 2011, there have been some government committee reports. One in 2018 on the funding, asking for a universal access to care free at the point of delivery. And then in 2019, an all-party group on social care report calling for an NHS equivalent sector body for care, registration of care workers, which does actually happen at the moment in Scotland. So safe to say a system under considerable stress, but not really anywhere on anyone's kind of real political agenda. It's something that kind of popped up here and there and then sort of disappeared without anyone really taking any time to sort of do the thinking and the policy work needed, really putting it into the too difficult box. But also during this time, there've been innovations. So for example, the whole issue around digital care and what place digital responses have to the provision of care and to enabling people to live independently in their own homes has come to the fore. And there's been a big ongoing debate about the place of digital in the care system and how far should it or could it, and is it a good idea for it to replace face-to-face and personally provided care. There's also been a push around population health and community asset-based approaches. So you get things like social prescribing, you get home share, shared lives, care navigators, a whole attempt, if you like, to look at preventing people from needing the sort of more expensive care and health interventions by increasing the way that resources are used in the community to support people's well-being. We had the NHS long-term plan and the push around integration of NHS and social care with the with the two being put into one department. And then what we get is COVID-19 hitting, which really has shown up the weaknesses in the current system, but also in the process of integration. I think as COVID-19 was developing, the whole political focus was on the NHS not being overwhelmed, and very, very little attention being paid to care or other kind of housing settings where people receive care. So no attention to domiciliary care, and that still isn't really being tackled. And we had, as everyone knows, 25,000 people discharged into care homes. I think I read somewhere the other day, 20,000 deaths in care homes directly attributed to COVID-19 being cited as the cause of death. And then I'm sure everyone's got stories about lack of access to PPE and the lengths that people have had to go to secure that and to enable their staff to feel safe. So what I think COVID-19's shown up is that total blind spot on the part of government and in the NHS regarding care homes and other similar settings. And I think the whole issue around integration of health and social care really showed that health was seen very much as the senior partner in the integration, and the social care system being seen as the place where the pressures on health are going to be relieved. So it's almost as a sort of rescue of the health system, rather than actually looking at the whole thing and seeing a real whole system integration and the role of care in preventing people having to sort of revert to the health system. But also at the other sort of end of that, below social care, you've got a whole kind of supported housing and care sector with sort of sheltered housing, extra care housing, independent living, all of which are at kind of the lower end of those sort of thresholds around care. Okay. And then, so in terms of what the future could be, what I'd like to suggest is that we've got a real opportunity. We've got political media and public attention on social care. So now is our chance to have a few very clear asks, and my asks, which would be up for debate, are that we have an end to eligibility thresholds and a focus on preventative support and support for carers, which a couple of our other speakers are going to talk about this afternoon, that the system should be fully funded and free at the point of need, that it could be funded through a mixed economy of tax, national insurance, care insurance that we would all take out, as well as time banking. So if people are volunteering or working in their community, providing care to neighbours and others, that there's a system for banking that care and earning credits against future sort of care costs. I think much more focus on the role that housing has got to play in the whole kind of pathways through care, health and support. Pooled budgets. I always think that issues arise and people drop through the net where one system comes up against another system. So I think if there was much more focus on pooling budgets across the whole kind of system, then that would stop some of that happening. And I think in any kind of pooled budgets, the incentives should be on prevention rather than escalation of care. On the workforce side, I think a funding settlement that actually leads to proper pay, a national register of practitioners, proper training pathways that integrate housing, health and social care learning, and that actually recognises that the care system is actually dealing with increasingly complex needs, and that there's a real need to have an academic underpinning around developing care models to work with those increasing complexities. And I think at the bottom of it is, I think individually all of us need to recognise that we are all likely to need care at some point in our lives, and what is it we would like to be provided to us, or for us to receive in the form of care, and what's the best way of being able to deliver that. So that's my, I think, 10 minutes, maybe over.
Thank you, Liz. Definitely set us up for a big thinking, I think. We have one question that someone posted ahead of time, and might not be the right place to ask it. Maybe Liz, your thoughts initially. Do we think the issues that have come to the fore will galvanise government to act and provide meaningful support? And it's kind of linked to the first question we have in the Q&A box, which is, do we think Simon Stevens' challenge, sorting out social care within a year, is even remotely possible? So those are kind of, Liz, do you think there is an opportunity, there is visibility, but how hopeful are you?
I think what I've seen of this government is that their whole policy agenda is actually based around responding to media pressure. So I think that if that continues to escalate and that there's a clear set of asks, then I think that they will have to respond to it. And also, given the fact that they've thrown loads of money and done lots of things that we would never have expected a Conservative government to do, that actually the sort of accepted kind of orthodoxies, if you like, about what's possible and what's feasible are out of the window. So I think we've really got an opportunity now to really push for a system. And I think in terms of Simon Stevens' statement, I don't necessarily think that we can sort it out in a year, because it's going to take a long time to implement any kind of changes. But I think that there possibly is the opportunity to actually develop the framework and to get it, through whatever parliamentary process is needed. So I think, this is the best chance we're going to have, and we really have to take advantage of it.
And I'm kind of, I notice a difference between the care for the elderly bit of the social care sector and the other bits of the social care sector. Yeah. And I think the care for the elderly bit, they're going to have a hell of a problem putting this back under the radar, because 20,000 people have died, in excess of 20,000 people have died, and that must be 100,000, 200,000 family members who've had someone die. And that's not something you forget over a news cycle. So I think on the spending front, there's a slight difference between the emergency spending now and where we think public sector spending might land in the future, and I think that's to play for. We have another question, Liz, just time to squeeze in maybe one more, which is any views on personalised budgets and individual choice? Do you think that leads to less waste and greater satisfaction, earlier intervention? Any views on personal budgets?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of individual choice, I think yes, and I think there's sort of an evidence base around that. I think one of the issues that we still need to work out in terms of providing social care is the kind of economies of scale in terms of doing things on a scheme basis as opposed to an individual response basis. And I know, for example, in a lot of the ways that care home funding and extra care funding has been modelled, it is to have a kind of core care element and then individual budgets that sit on top of that. So I think we have to sort of look at a mixed economy, and possibly a kind of, if you like, a sort of sliding, a sort of move of how far is personal budget funded and how much is kind of scheme funded when you're talking about care homes and those kinds of schemes.
Thank you. We're going to move on now. I know we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A queue, as it were. We're going to keep those there, and there may be that we have they're suitable for another speaker, and we may come back to them. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to hand over to Paula.
Thank you, Sue. I'm just going to share a screen with a PowerPoint slide, a visual aid for everyone as well, so we can move on from my slightly green hue. Call it up for you. Hopefully you can see that.
Yeah.
Yes, great. Okay, so thank you again. A little bit about Hestia to begin with. So I'm going to basically outline our organisational response over the last 5 months to COVID-19. We are a London-based charity. We have services in London and the South East. We worked with about 11,000 people last year, people who have been affected by crisis and would otherwise be homeless. A really diverse portfolio of services, people with strengths and aspirations and needs in terms of mental health, older people, learning disabilities, physical disability, people who have an offending past, people who've experienced domestic abuse, and people who've also been victims of modern slavery. A real wide spectrum as well in terms of the support that we provide, from public health, community-based preventative services, right up to the 24/7 registered care homes that will obviously be the focus of the presentation this afternoon. Hestia has 3 registered care homes, all in Northwest London, with 35 beds in total. We provide accommodation, support and care, which is obviously all regulated by the Care Quality Commission. It's worth noting that we don't actually own the buildings. The landlords are all housing associations as well, so that brings its own challenges and opportunities. The average size of one of our care homes is 10 to 15 beds. So it's very much run like a converted house, like a home environment, and probably challenges the predominant norm that we hear about care homes in public and in the media. Our client group are people with severe and enduring mental illness. So although a lot will be over 50, we can have, and we do have, some service users who are in the 30s. But again, we're not the stereotypical care home that's being mooted at the moment for older people over 65s and people with dementia. We're also, as Liz mentioned, a supported housing provider. And I suppose for us over the last 4 or 5 months, it's been interesting to see the way our care homes have been spoken about and treated by health and social care, by the media, by the government, versus how our supported accommodation has been dealt with. It hasn't had the same focus, but to us, the client group are very similar, albeit there's not a requirement for regulated services. And I know from colleagues in extra care as well, as Liz referred to, there's been I suppose, the reason for that differentiation hasn't always been clear. I think to begin with, there was a relative invisibility of the care sector, and I think that was very disempowering for our staff, for our service users and for their families. They weren't been seen as part of the national conversation. It was great to obviously see the move to the clap for carers, but obviously we've seen a different kind of coverage around care homes again in the last couple of weeks. So it's really added to the anxiety and the fears at a time of great uncertainty for everyone in the care home environment. I think the misunderstanding of care home provision has also been felt through relationships with key stakeholders over the last 5 months. We've had staff who had to move really quickly to emergency rotas. We've had to obviously bring in really consistent pool staff to make sure we didn't have any agency staff travelling between care homes or between services to minimise risk. We've had to introduce much greater levels of PPE, which really worked against the idea of trying to create a psychologically informed environment in the home. And on top of all of that, our staff have had to A, sometimes shield, and B, work very differently with people who they had established relationships with. The power dynamics started to shift. We had to robustly challenge hospital discharge referrals. We had to explain to clinicians that we couldn't accept people without a COVID-19 test back into their home environment or new referrals. And that was very, very challenging for us and was an ongoing conversation right up until the government clarified that testing should be part of the hospital discharge pathway, which was on the 15th of April. So it really added a lot of stress for us. Another area that we really struggled with over the last 5 months is how we include families and visitors in the care home environment. Social connectivity is really important to everybody that we work with in terms of rehabilitation and recovery. We we're watching the government guidance. We saw SAGE suggest there was evidence of community transmission in early February, but the care home guidance suggested that visiting could still continue at the end of February. In around the 10th of March, I think, there was a suggestion that people who were symptomatic shouldn't visit care homes. But we then, as a provider, had to make the decision ourselves to speak to visitors and to family members and to our service users and explain that we had to proactively discourage visitors from the middle of March. We didn't have government guidance to back us in that position, and it was very difficult to be able to explain that to people, that at a time of such uncertainty, the importance of a physical hug, of seeing a familiar face, just couldn't happen. And as you can imagine, it did have an impact on people's mental health. We had people whose health deteriorated as a result, and we had people who really felt more isolated because of that decision that we had to take. Eventually, we got government guidance on the 2nd of April to say that visiting should only happen in exceptional circumstances, but it was really, really challenging for us. And we experienced some really difficult decisions then as well about needing to step people up. The same stakeholders who wanted to step people down to our provision were reluctant to accept some of our residents who need to step up because of their mental ill health at that time. One of the silver linings at that time was the community assets. People in the local borough identified and wanted to support their local community. Local businesses and residents came together and offered us a small grant. So we were able to provide laptops and tablets to keep residents who had to have a hospital admission connected with their home and their key worker, but also ensure that residents were connected with family members who they'd frequently meet for lunch once a week, or, where that connection with their family is so important to their everyday well-being, and especially at a time of such uncertainty with COVID-19. Unsurprisingly, PPE was a huge challenge for us. We worked out in early March that we needed 4,000 disposable masks and 4,000 sets of disposable gloves, in addition to all of the rest of the PPE, every week, just to provide safe and supportive services. We received a supply of 300 gloves from government at the end of March. So we had to beg and borrow and put in requests for PPE to...
Paula, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. We had to experience a rise from 8p per unit to 80p per unit. The introduction of the National Supply Disruption Line was very limited. It didn't work for us. And we're still experiencing those PPE difficulties now. There's confusion over what type mask we should use, whether it's airborne or not. And a really robust plan for PPE is still needed. The emotional impact of all of this on our staff, our service users and their families cannot be underestimated. The anxiety and the fear is palpable still in our care homes. People are grieving. They've had their own experiences in their families, and they've still had to come to work with all of this uncertainty. We obviously had the killing of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement, and our staff members in our care homes are disproportionately representative of Black and minority ethnic communities, and our service users are also. So there's still a lot that we need to reflect on in terms of health inequities. And I suppose for me, that's key to moving forward. We need to reflect and learn and make sure everybody's voice is heard in this process going forward. In terms of the movement that's needed, obviously in terms of PPE, infection control grants are coming through, but it's a postcode lottery. Testing has only been confirmed for our care home staff on a regular basis as of this week. So for me, the real priority going forward is to make sure there's a psychosocial response as well as a clinical response to COVID-19. We need the white paper, the funding that Liz has mentioned, and I suppose ideally we're moving towards a national health and care service and that integrated provision going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. We have some time for questions. Julie Layton, I'm going to hang on to your question for the other Julie, because I think as the RP, the Housing Association on the panel, she may be able to answer that question a little better. So then we have a question from Bernie, which says, so Paula, a question for you really. How ambitious do you think the sector could or should be? Should we aim for stretching standards, or should we aim for just enough in the interest of the ability to fund it. And thank you for the comment on the all-female panel. So Paula, how ambitious do you think we should be as a sector in what Liz described as the clear ask?
I think we absolutely need to be ambitious, as Liz said. I mean, this has to be the opportune time to push. We need to ensure that the homes that we're providing are a home that would be suitable for all of us, that we would want for our loved ones. This is the time to flag the inequalities and the inequities that we've seen, that we're experiencing, all of the issues that are flagged in the polls in terms of we are a London living wage employer, for example. We want to ensure that people have proper terms and conditions, but we also need to think about the well-being and the impact of this experience, but also of working in the care sector. Everything that we see the NHS asking for at this time, we need to ensure that the care sector is included in that conversation as well. And this has to be the time where we push for integration and reflect on the learning and achieve a parity of esteem. So all of those things that we've been asking for forever, now is the time where we need to be as ambitious as possible and push the agenda.
Thank you. And then I guess, so a question which is about perhaps the point that's been touched on before, is about individuals' mental health were almost entirely ignored until very recently in terms of testing. And how can we make sure that all of the sector is included, including mental health, learning disability, and the full range? Do you see that as an issue? Do you see the kind of getting that message across about this is more than care for the elderly?
Yeah, and I suppose that was our experiences. A lot of the data requests that we received, for example, a lot of the infection control funding criteria are all based around the assumption that we provide care homes for people that are over 65 and people with dementia. And as I've mentioned, that's not the case for us. Explaining that our care home is for people with severe and enduring mental illness. It has been a surprise to people who we consider to be, ongoing stakeholders. Yeah, so it's very much something that we need to continue to push, and parity of esteem has to apply, from a granular level the whole way up to policy and strategy.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to move on now, a little ahead of time. I think, is it Hayley, you're going to speak first and then Julie, is that right? Yeah, okay. So Hayley, over to you. I think we have a video as well that we want to share at this point.
No, I think Sue, we're gonna do Hayley, then me, then the video.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So apologies, Hayley, go ahead, please.
That's okay. Hi, so I'm Hayley. I've mentioned that I am the founder of Helping Harry Trust and Harry's Pals. But I just wanted to let you know that before all of that, I'm actually a carer myself. So this conversation is very important to me because not only am I a carer, but I also am affected by disability. My son Harry is 5 years old. So not we're talking a lot about elderly people and care homes, but I suppose I'm here to raise awareness of care, and that's in many different forms. So Harry's 5 years old. He has got quadriplegic cerebral palsy. And as a result of that, he has severe learning disabilities. He's cognitively around the age of a 3-month-old. He is completely immobile, so he's wheelchair bound. He has problems with his vision. He's registered blind. He has breathing problems. He's completely tube fed. There's quite a long list. We didn't know there was anything wrong with Harry when he was born. It was only the day after he was born when he started to have seizures, and was rushed to neonatal, where he had lots of different tests. And after the 3rd day of tests, lumbar punctures, they didn't know whether it was meningitis infection or a virus. They did an EEG and then an MRI scan. The 4th day after Harry was born, we was ushered into a side room where we were given the devastating news that Harry had received brain damage on both sides of his brain because of 2 strokes. And then a week later, once they'd managed to get the seizures under control, we were sent home. And we were just said, wait and see how he gets on. you know, if he's sitting up at 6 months, that's a really good sign, but he might not, he might just be delayed. See if he's walking when he gets to 1. If not, you know, just wait. So we kept going, and we were missing milestones, and you know, 6 months came along and he didn't sit up and he still wasn't rolling. A year came along and he wasn't sitting up, let alone walking. And it was a really, really difficult time. Harry received support in terms of physiotherapists and occupational therapists, but as families, we didn't receive any support emotionally. I sort of thought we'd get like a key worker or somebody that would sort of hold our hands. Obviously, with what had happened was traumatic. We had a 2-year-old daughter as well to look after. Our mental health, you know, had been really impacted. And then we were meant to look after a child, which we didn't really know how to. There was no guidebook on, you know, no NCT classes. We had to just get on with it. And the first 2 years, you know, all these knockbacks and, you know, were really, really, really tough. So, you know, I'm 5 years down the line now, and I can look back on it and realise just how wrong it was that we weren't offered any support. And by support, I mean emotional support, which is, you know, counselling or any type of therapy or a mentor. So it's taken 5 years, and, you know, to get to a point where I do feel stronger, and I've been able to finally try and find the support, to say that I feel that I am, you know, and to able to use my experiences of what we've learned, and sadly, you know, things that haven't been particularly positive, to change these things that have happened to us into a positive. So that's where Hayleys Pals comes in. So I have set up Hayleys Pals, which is to provide emotional support to parents like myself that have had a child that has got an unforeseen disability or illness that is really struggling with their emotional, with, you know, the emotional impact of it. So Hayleys Pals offers and does 4 things. We provide respite breaks to families. So we already have some families that are attending our respite breaks, albeit a little bit later than planned. Counselling and therapy, which is extremely important at the moment, obviously with the coronavirus. A lot of parents like myself that have children shielding, a lot of the support that they would normally receive in terms of respite breaks is all out of the window. So we are finding that more people than ever are coming to try and access our counselling therapy sessions, which are really important because they give people coping mechanisms. And anybody that knows, you know, if somebody that's looking after anybody with a severe illness or disability, it's not easy. It's a roller coaster ride. There's unforeseen things around every corner, and I think something that makes us more resilient, such as coping mechanisms, is it's very important. So counselling and therapy sessions, respite breaks, which is not to be underestimated. Knowing that you've got something coming up to look forward to is really important. So we're working with hospices in the initial stages to so that they are able to look after the child of the parents that is disabled or severely ill, so that they're able to get time out with their partner or their other siblings that they might want to invest a little bit more time in, because sometimes the needs of the disabled child takes more priority, unfortunately. And also we are planning on doing, we are campaigning, so to make change, and that looks like changes in the workplace, using our experiences. For example, we can't leave the house a lot of the time because there isn't any toilets to take Harry. Harry can't go on a baby changing table anymore. So if we need to leave the house, we have to think, will there be anywhere that we could change Harry? So and that that stops us from going to a lot of places, and for us to be able to go out with our other children as well. So that really does limit us. And parks and how it, you know, a lot of places are not as accessible as you think. So the Hayleys Pledge really hopes to make changes through the campaigning too, which leads us on to Hayleys Pledge, which is a new initiative working with social housing, which Julie Doyle is going to talk about more. But thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Hayley. Thank you. Extraordinary, personal, bringing the personal into the discussion, which is really critical, isn't it? Julie, over to you.
Thank you, Sue. I suppose the first thing to make clear, if it's not already, is that I'm actually Hayley's mum. A bit odd Hayley calling me Julie. I'm Hayley's mum and therefore Harry's nan, as well as being Chief Exec of a housing association and involved in board member roles at Anchor. So I've got a very personal insight into the tragic circumstances that Hayley talks about, and also a professional responsibility to consider how we can make a difference. And like was said before by Liz, this just seemed to me a perfect opportunity to be able to voice the concerns that I've been talking about for quite a few years, but a really perfect opportunity with the Clap for Carers and with the wider society being more responsive to be able to do something. So absolutely thrilled to say that I got some early conversations and some fantastic support from the Chartered Institute of Housing, the National Housing Federation, Place Shapers and Carers UK. And we pulled together Hayleys Pledge, taking Hayley's advice in terms of one aspect of being a carer. And we pulled together the pledge and we started to talk about that to housing associations only a few weeks ago now on webinars like this. And the response, I've never known in 30 years a response like the response that we've had. It's been humbling, overwhelming, and hopefully today we can convince a few more people to sign up. We're up to about 50 already. There's 4 points to the pledge. I'll quickly whiz through what they are. The first point is about carers. Carers who happen to be a carer. I don't mean employed carers, I mean carers who will work in your workplace. It's estimated 3 in 5 of us will be a carer at some point. So you will have people who work for you that are also juggling caring responsibilities at home. And one of the things that COVID's, I think, brought our attention to is how flexible as employers we can be. People working more at home, people working more agilely. Those types of practices can be extremely helpful for carers. And lots of organisations are now looking at what carer-friendly policies that they can adopt. So that's the first point. The second point is about being more mindful of the office space. We all have, as housing associations and other employers, we have a lot of power in terms of the offices that we provide, really making sure that they are accessible. A commitment to, if you are a housing association that is building a new office or reconfiguring, which I know a lot of people are after COVID, are looking at the office space, to install something called change in places, which I didn't know what that was before we had Harry, but as Hayley said, you know, it's very difficult to go out with someone that's incontinent. 1 in 240 people need a change in places loo. A change in places loo is about the same size as a car parking space, and basically as a hoist and a bed. So we're asking people to install change in places loos, and again, people have said it's a no-brainer. For those of us who are providing new homes, it was a question before that was raised by someone raised a question before. About talking to for us that are actively building, to be building more homes that are fully accessible, understanding that the demographic is changing, and yet we're still as a sector broadly building the same old 2-3 bed properties. So building a higher percentage of properties as the demographic and the needs change, and importantly looking at the accommodation that we already have. Success for me would be the day that we don't have aid and adaptation budgets, when we don't need them, because we mainstream the thinking in the same way as 20 years ago you wouldn't have automatically put double glazing in. Now you wouldn't think twice. Wouldn't it be great if we had a situation where your improvement programs had that built in, that you would automatically do grab rails and so on? There's something brilliant that we're doing called Invisible by Design, which hopefully people are aware of. But it's design issues that help people with mobility problems, which more and more people will have, but aren't ugly. And if you are able and young, you wouldn't know, then you wouldn't even see that they were there. So that's brilliant stuff. And the final point is about carers that we employ. It was talked before about getting more money into the I mean, broadly, you know, but at the baseline, that's what we need to do, so that we can pay people more, that we can have more aspirational career paths for people, and to look at the carers that we employ and how we can facilitate.
You have 1 minute, Julie.
Yeah, almost finished. The last point that I want to say is a shameless plea. I make no apologies because it's such a good cause. A plea, if you can, to support Harry's Pals would be amazing. Hayleys outlined that we are helping some families that are absolutely at breaking point. The funds that Harry's Pals get has been through sponsored events that have been dried up. So if there is anything that any organisations out there can do, we're losing about £40,000 this year. And I'm genuinely fearful that we won't be able to continue to provide that support if we can't get some fundraising. So if you can help, please get in touch with me. And then finally, a very short video that should pull all that together. Thank you, Sue. If somebody could play the video, that would be great.
Harry's 5 years old. He's very smiley little boy that loves cuddles and music, and obviously he's also severely disabled, and that's because Harry suffered strokes prior to being born. So as a result of that, Harry has significant brain damage on both sides of his brain. He's got quadriplegic cerebral palsy, breathing difficulties, he's completely tube fed, immobile, he's got no functional use of his arms and legs, but despite all of that, he does give us lots of smiles, and yeah, you're a little hero, aren't you, Harry? Eh? It's taken me a long while to get to a point where I feel able to start to help to support other families. We've gone through a really difficult 5 years, but as a positive, we have actually learned a lot through the past 5 years, and these are lessons that I feel would be selfish of me not to use to help support other families. So we've set up Harry's Pals because there was a real lack of support for myself, my husband Andy, when Harry was born. There was lots of support for Harry. We were sent home, we had the physio appointments and occupational therapists come in, but there was no support for us as a family in terms of any emotional support.
Hey, just trying to put Harry down for a nap, and I just wanted to give you an example of what it's like when Harry is fighting with sleep. Becomes very unsettled. It's really hard seeing Harry this upset, and it's really unfair.
That's why I think Harry's Pals is going to be so important, because we want to be offering bespoke counselling to families when they need it the most. Having a child with that is severely disabled or ill is very, very hard emotionally. I'm not afraid to admit that I've struggled with anxiety and depression, and I think many carers will also hold their hands up and say that that's been a problem for them too. I think that we need to acknowledge that, you know, carers are the real sort of lifeline throughout our country, and we need to do more to support them.
Thank you very much indeed. And we will be sending out details for supporting Harry's Pals and for the Hayleys Pledge immediately after this event. So everyone who's a participant will receive that, and I'm sure will consider it immediately. We have a little time left for questions across the panel. I'm going to start with Julie's question, which she's been very patient and it has the most votes, so that's good prioritization. And it's about housing associations have stopped delivering supported housing due to very low grant rates and an inability to make the finances stack up. Very low grant rates means you have to take on more debt, which means you have both higher interest payments and more risk, because missing an interest payment is catastrophic. And so she asked, how can we persuade Homes England of the value of supported housing? And someone has replied in the comments that actually Wales ring-fences the supported housing grant and housing associations still invested in Wales. So devolution seems to provide real positive effects there. I'm going to come to Julie, being an RP and an RP that does do care and support. And so how have you faced those challenges of persuading the grant givers or managing to do it some other way? And what do you think we should be doing in the future?
Yeah. Oh gosh, this is such a big question. It's so complex. We do still provide care and support and in a variety of different ways, as Paula mentioned, not just for the elderly, also for people with mental health issues and domestic violence and so on. It's the one area of the business that gives me more sleepless nights than anywhere else, because you are always strapped for cash. Our experience hasn't been particularly with capital. We've had quite a lot of support from Homes England, and capital issues aren't so pressing. It's more the ongoing revenue support and making the schemes stack up ongoing. We've got some schemes where we're losing money, and there's other schemes where we're then cross-subsidising from. It's never going to be a massively profitable part of our business, although some care providers do it very well. So there's some lessons that we do need to learn, and that's about private payers and the amount of which that you have. I think there's more to it, if I'm really honest. I think it's also that it's not sexy. I am a strong believer of where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm committed personally to it. So somehow I keep doggedly pushing on. And I keep convincing the board of its merits, and I keep trying. It's not sexy and it's hard. So I think there's also a story to be told. I think it's about bringing it to life to people, about people seeing the need, and you know, a lot of people sort of think care's not for us, and I think it's about, as people get older and the demographic changes and people are living with more complex issues, I think we will have no choice as a sector to consider it more.
Thank you. Any of the other panelists like to come in on that, on the support to build long-term assets that require long-term debt with short-term revenue contracts with very thin margins? Anyone out there, anyone in the Microsoft panelists got a magic wand for that one?
I think the thing I would say is that there is a lot of private investment that is always looking for return. And that has come into the sector, whether it's the care sector or the supported housing, specialised supported housing sector, you know, and we know the regulators got concerns about that. So in terms of, you know, somebody somewhere has worked out that there is money to be made here, otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. So, you know, there is a case there to be made, which is, I guess, a very broad brush sort of statement, but those investors wouldn't be looking to kind of make those returns if they didn't think they were there to be made. And so in terms of having something that Homes England would support, I think probably we need to maybe make the case more clearly about the value. And there's been work done before around the sort of cost benefit of supported housing or extra care housing, and how much it can save to different parts of the system. So whether it saves money to the national health or the probation or the prison system or whatever. But I think maybe we actually need to kind of just rehash those arguments and update them and put them again to the fore.
Thank you, Liz. And I think there's some press coverage today of the regulators' concerns about certainly the lease-based providers, and I think there is a kind of another opportunity opening up there to present arguments which say, well, if you don't want it done like this, with some very high returns going to leaving the sector, as it were, then we have to think some other way of doing it. I'm going to start to bring us to a close. First off, I wanted to ask Zena if we could repost the poll, and I'd like to ask all of our participants to vote again on the poll that we have. You might vote the same as you voted before, and perhaps you didn't have a chance to vote before. So please get voting. And in the meantime, I'd just like to say how grateful we are at Campbell Tickell that our panelists joined us today and gave us of their time and of their insights and their passion about this diverse sector and how important it is. I think they've led us through those challenges from a sort of policy point of view, to organisational challenges and real personal perspectives that link us back to why we do the hard work that Julie underlined. So we will be sending out links to the Hayleys Pledge and the Hayleys Pals website. We will be sending around the recording of this session, and we're really happy to have you all with us. Zena, I can't see anyone voting, so perhaps nobody is, or am I looking in the wrong place?
I'm just giving it another few minutes, but
oh, you can see people, you can see activity. I can't. Okay, right.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, cool. So just waiting for. We will capture the Q&A that we didn't get to answer the questions. In the Q&A, there's actually quite a lot of good suggestions. So there's people making suggestions backwards and forwards. So we will capture those and distribute them. In particular, for our panelists, there's a few suggestions for contacts and ways of working. And we may try and look at the questions we didn't get to answer and see if we can answer some of those in the email as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, that would be good.
So in terms of the voting in the poll, I hope you can all see that now, is a bit more spread out, actually. That is really interesting. So putting more money in is still top, but only by a slither. So we have coming up second, improving care, workers' pay and conditions. And I think third, if I read across quickly, the integration of care, which was in second place before. And then we have some people putting a priority on recognising that care often happens in the more settings than care homes, which I think was much of what we've discussed today. So I'd like to thank you all for participating. Do keep an eye out for future Campbell Tickell webinars. We're getting into the swing of these, and we really enjoy doing them and really enjoy the debate that it provokes. So thank you again, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.